The great ship Eternal Dawn floated in the darkness between stars, its silver hull catching the light from distant suns. Inside the massive vessel, fear moved through the corridors like a disease. Commander Jake Morrison walked quickly toward the main council chamber, his boots clicking on the metal floors. He had been a human liaison officer for 3 years now, but he had never seen the alien delegates this scared. The doors to the chamber slid open with a soft hiss. Jake stepped inside and immediately felt the tension in the air. 12 different alien species sat around the great circular table, and every one of them looked worried. Some were whispering in their strange languages. Others sat in complete silence, staring at their hands or claws or tentacles. At the head of the table stood Ambassador Velthan, the representative of the Alteran people. His blue skin, usually bright and healthy, had turned pale gray. His large black eyes seemed hollow, and his tall, thin frame looked even thinner than usual. Jake had known Velthan for 2 years, and the alien had always been proud and strong. Now he looked like he might collapse at any moment. "The reports are confirmed," Velthan said, his voice weak and shaking. "Kepler 442b is completely dead. Nothing grows there anymore. The soil has turned to dust. Our farming colonies have been abandoned." A sound like clicking metal came from across the room. Hive Queen Clicks, the insectoid representative, moved her mandibles rapidly. Her species communicated through sounds that reminded Jake of typewriter keys. When she spoke in the common galactic language, her voice buzzed like an angry bee. "My brood worlds suffer the same fate," she said. "Trappist 1E shows no green. My workers starve. Some have begun to eat the weak ones." Jake felt his stomach turn. The insectoid species had always been disturbing to humans, but the idea of them eating each other made him sick. He looked around the table at the other representatives. The rock-like granite people sat motionless, but even they seemed worried. The floating gas beings called wisps moved nervously in their containment suits. "How bad is it really?" Jake asked, stepping forward. All eyes turned to him. As the only human in the room, he often felt out of place among these ancient civilizations. Humans had only joined the consortium 30 years ago, and most aliens still saw them as young and inexperienced. Chief Scientist Nora Blackwell stood up from her seat near the back. She was one of only 5 humans aboard the Eternal Dawn, and her job was to study alien technology and biology. Her brown hair was messy, and dark circles under her eyes showed that she had not slept in days. "It is worse than bad," she said, activating a holographic display above the table. "The blight appeared 6 months ago on the outer farming worlds. We thought it was just a natural plant disease, but it spread too fast and killed too much." The hologram showed a map of the local galaxy. Red dots marked the infected worlds. There were too many red dots. "At first it only affected grain crops," Nora continued. "Then it moved to vegetables. Now it kills everything that grows. Trees, grass, flowers, food plants. Everything dies within days of infection." Ambassador Velthan suddenly grabbed the edge of the table. His legs shook and he nearly fell. 2 other Alterans rushed to help him, but he waved them away. "I have not eaten a proper meal in 15 days, he said. "None of my people have. We survive on emergency rations, but they will not last much longer." Hive Queen Clicks clicked louder. "My species requires fresh protein. The stored food does not keep us strong. My workers grow weak and angry. Soon they will turn on each other completely." Jake looked around the room again. Now he could see what he had missed before. All of the aliens looked thinner, weaker, more desperate. The proud beings who had once ruled star systems were slowly starving to death. "How long do we have?" he asked. Nora touched her control pad, and new numbers appeared in the hologram. Based on current food stores and population needs, most worlds have between 2 and 3 months before complete societal collapse. Some of the larger colonies might last 4 months. The smaller settlements will fall first. The room fell silent. 4 months to save billions of lives across dozens of worlds. Jake had served in the human military before joining the consortium, and he had seen bad situations before, but nothing like this. Dr. Michael Chen, another human scientist, cleared his throat. He was a xenobiologist who studied alien life forms, and he had been working with Nora to understand the blight. "The disease is not natural," he said quietly. I have studied the genetic structure of the blight organisms. They are too perfect, too designed. Someone made this weapon to target specific crop types used by consortium worlds. More clicking came from Hive Queen clicks. You believe this is an attack? I believe this is the beginning of a war, Michael replied. Someone wants the consortium to fall. They are making you starve so you will be weak when they come. Ambassador Velthan tried to stand straighter, but his body would not obey. Who would do such a thing? We have enemies, yes, but none with this kind of power. Jake stepped closer to the table. An idea was forming in his mind, but he was not sure if he should share it. These aliens had technology that humans could barely understand. They had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years while humans were still learning to make fire. But maybe that was exactly the point. What about Earth, he said. The room fell silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. Several aliens looked at each other with expressions Jake could not read. Earth? Repeated Velthan. Your homeworld? But it is just a farming planet. You have no advanced agricultural technology. That is exactly my point, Jake said, feeling more confident. This blight targets advanced consortium farming methods, but Earth never used those methods. We grow food the old way, the simple way. Maybe the simple way is what we need now. Nora was nodding slowly. Jake might be right. The blight attacks specific genetic markers found in modified consortium crops, but Earth crops were never modified using consortium technology. They might be immune. Hive Queen clicks made a sound like grinding metal. You suggest that primitive human farming could save our advanced civilization? I suggest that maybe we have been thinking about this wrong, Jake replied. Advanced does not always mean better. Sometimes simple works when complex fails. Ambassador Velthan looked at Jake with his large, dark eyes. For the first time in days, there was something that might have been hope in his expression. What? Do you propose, human Jake Morrison? Jake took a deep breath. What he was about to suggest could either save the galaxy or make him look like a fool in front of the most powerful beings in known space. I propose we go to Earth, he said. I propose we ask for help. Captain Lisa Thompson stood on the bridge of the UES Harvest Moon, watching Earth grow larger on the main screen. Behind her, the most desperate collection of alien beings she had ever seen waited in the passenger quarters. The 2-week journey from the consortium core worlds had been difficult. 3 of Hive Queen Clix's attendants had died from starvation during the trip, and Ambassador Velthan could barely walk without help. Captain, we are receiving landing clearance from Earth Control, reported Lieutenant Brad Wilson from his station. They are directing us to Landing Bay 7 at the Washington Global Spaceport. Lisa nodded. Take us down, Lieutenant, and send word ahead that we need medical teams standing by. Some of our passengers are in very bad shape. As the Harvest Moon descended through Earth's atmosphere, Lisa could see the faces of the alien delegates pressed against the windows. She wondered what they were thinking. Most of them had never visited Earth before. To them it was just a backwater world that had joined the consortium recently. They expected to see primitive farms and simple villages. The ship settled onto the landing pad with a gentle thump. Within minutes, medical teams were rushing aboard to help the weakest aliens. Lisa watched as Ambassador Velthan was carefully placed on a stretcher. His blue skin had turned almost white, and his breathing was shallow. Will he live? Asked Dr. Rebecca Mills, the ship's medical officer. I hope so, Lisa replied. He is one of the most important voices for peace in the consortium. If we lose him, this crisis gets much worse. Outside, a crowd had gathered. Lisa could see news reporters, government officials, and what looked like hundreds of farmers. Word of the galactic food crisis had spread quickly on Earth, and humans were taking it seriously. President Robert Hayes himself came aboard the ship to greet the delegation. He was a tall man with gray hair and kind eyes. Behind him walked Agriculture Secretary Maria Santos, a woman who had grown up on a farm in California before becoming one of Earth's top food production experts. Welcome to Earth, President Hayes said to the conscious aliens. We know you are suffering and we want to help. Our medical teams will take care of your sick friends, and our farmers have been working day and night to find solutions. Hive Queen Clix clicked her mandibles weakly. Even she looked tired, though her species was known for incredible endurance. We thank you, human president, but we do not understand how your simple world can help where our advanced sciences have failed. Maria Santos stepped forward. Your Majesty, I think you will be surprised by what you see. Earth has faced food crises many times in our history. We have learned to adapt and survive. The group left the spaceport in a convoy of vehicles. As they drove through the countryside, the aliens stared out the windows in amazement. Where they expected to see small farms with primitive tools, they saw something completely different. Massive vertical farms stretched high into the sky like glass towers. Each level was filled with green plants growing under artificial lights. Automated systems moved between the plants, harvesting ripe crops and planting new seeds. The buildings produced thousands of times more food per square meter than traditional farming. How is this possible? Wheezed Ambassador Velthan from his medical bed in the transport vehicle. Your technology level is supposed to be much lower than ours. Dr. Amanda Foster, Earth's leading agricultural engineer, smiled. We humans have always been good at making the most of limited space and resources. When our population grew too large for traditional farming, we learned to farm upward instead of outward. The convoy stopped at an underground facility built into a hillside. Inside, they found vast hydroponic complexes where crops grew without soil, their roots suspended in nutrient-rich water. Fish swam in tanks below the plants, and their waste provided fertilizer for the crops above. This is aquaponics, explained Dr. Foster. The fish and plants help each other grow. It is an old idea, but we have made it very efficient. Hive Queen. Clicks made a sound of surprise. Your food systems are interconnected. Each part supports the others. This is similar to how my hive functions, but applied to agriculture. Exactly, said Maria Santos. We learned from nature. Everything is connected, everything has a purpose. Their next stop was the ocean, where floating agricultural platforms stretched to the horizon. The platforms used seawater and sunlight to grow algae, which was then processed into protein-rich food. Other sections grew traditional vegetables using desalinated water and artificial soil. The ocean covers most of our planet, explained Tom Bradley, a farmer who managed one of the floating facilities. We could not let all that space go to waste. Tom was a simple man with rough hands and a weathered face. He had been farming for 40 years, first on land and now on the sea. To the aliens, he probably looked like just another primitive human. But as he talked about his work, they began to understand that he knew things their most advanced scientists did not. Your consortium worlds, Tom said. They each specialize in one type of farming, right? One world grows grain, another grows vegetables, another raises protein animals. Yes, replied the Granite People representative, whose rocky voice sounded like grinding stone. Specialization creates efficiency. Tom shook his head. Specialization creates weakness. If something goes wrong with your grain world, you lose all your grain. If something attacks your vegetable world, you lose all your vegetables. That is why this blight hurt you so badly. He led them to a traditional farm that looked almost ancient compared to the high-tech facilities they had seen. Here, different crops grew side by side in the same fields. Corn stalks reached toward the sky while beans climbed up their sides. Squash plants spread between them, covering the ground with broad leaves. This is called companion planting, Tom explained. The corn gives the beans something to climb on. The beans put nitrogen in the soil to feed the corn. The squash leaves keep weeds from growing and hold moisture in the soil. If one crop fails, the others keep growing. Ambassador Velthan, who had been carried to the farm on a medical stretcher, raised his head to get a better look. The plants work together like a team. Every farm on Earth works this way, said Tom. We grow many different crops in the same place. If disease kills one type of plant, the others survive. We never put all our food in one basket. Dr. Foster pulled out a tablet and showed them data from around the world. Earth produces food in deserts, in frozen areas, underground, underwater, and even in space stations. We have backup systems for our backup systems. It is not the most efficient way, but it is the most reliable way. Hive Queen clicked thoughtfully. Your species has survived multiple extinction events. You have learned that survival is more important than efficiency. That is right, President Hayes said. Humans have always been good at adapting when things go wrong. We have faced ice ages, diseases, famines, and wars. Each time we found a way to keep growing food. As the day ended, the alien delegates gathered in a conference room to discuss what they had seen. Many of them looked confused. Their entire understanding of agriculture had been challenged in a single day. I do not understand, said the WISP representative, his voice coming from a translation device attached to his containment suit. If human farming methods are so good, why did we not adopt them when you joined the consortium? Maria Santos exchanged glances with President Hayes. Because you thought our methods were primitive. Your advanced civilizations had developed what you believed were better ways to grow food. You saw our diverse, complicated farming systems as inefficient. But now we see that complicated can mean strong, said Ambassador Velthan. His voice was still weak, but there was hope in it now. Human agriculture is like a vast web. Cut one strand and the web still holds. President Hayes stood up. We want to help you rebuild your food systems using our methods. But it will not be easy. You will need to change how you think about farming. Instead of huge single-crop worlds, you will need to create diverse, interconnected growing systems. Can it be done in time? Asked Hive Queen Clicks. My people have less than 3 months before complete collapse. Dr. Foster nodded confidently. With Earth's help, we can have emergency food growing within weeks. But rebuilding your entire agricultural system will take years. Then we begin immediately, said Ambassador Velthan, struggling to sit up straighter. Earth has shown us hope. Now we must act on that hope before it is too late. Outside the conference room windows, the sun was setting, over Earth's endless farms. Tomorrow the real work would begin. General David Parker stood in the largest military planning room on Earth, surrounded by maps of distant star systems and alien worlds. The room buzzed with activity as human officers worked alongside alien military commanders. At the center of it all stood Supreme Strategist Corvin, a tall reptilian being whose scales shifted color when he was thinking hard. Right now, those scales were flashing between green and orange very quickly. The situation grows worse each day, Corvin said, his forked tongue tasting the air. 3 more farming colonies have gone completely silent. We estimate that means another 50 million beings without food. David nodded grimly. How long before we can launch Operation Seed Drop? The first ships will be ready in 4 days, replied Colonel Mark Stevens, who commanded the military escort forces. But I am worried about what we might find out there. Intelligence reports suggest someone is still spreading the blight. In the corner of the room, Dr. Rachel Kim looked up from her computer screens. She had been working for 18 hours straight, modifying Earth crops to survive on alien worlds. Her team of xenobotanists worked around the clock in laboratories across the planet, racing against time and biology. The Alteran wheat variant is ready for testing, she announced. We have modified it to handle their atmospheric conditions and soil chemistry. The protein content has been increased by 30% to match their nutritional needs. What about food for the hive species? Asked General Parker. Rachel rubbed her tired eyes. That is more complicated. They need very high protein levels, and their digestive systems are completely different from mammals. We are working on a hybrid bean that should provide what they need, but it will take another 2 days. Across the room, a communication screen lit up with an incoming message from Altera Prime. The image showed Ambassador Velthan, still weak but looking better after receiving medical treatment on Earth. Behind him, other Alterans moved slowly, their blue skin pale with hunger. General Parker, Velthan said, his voice crackling through the transmission. Our situation is critical. Food riots have begun in the outer cities. My government is losing control. If help does not arrive soon, our civilization will collapse. Completely. We understand, David replied. The first supply ships launch tomorrow. Engineer Paul Morrison is personally leading the advanced team to set up growing facilities on your world. Paul Morrison, Jake's younger brother, stepped into view of the camera. He was a practical man who specialized in rapid construction of agricultural systems. His hands were already dirty from working on the equipment that would soon save lives on distant worlds. "Ambassador, we are bringing everything we need to start growing food within days of arrival," Paul said. "Our emergency crop systems can produce edible food in 72 hours using your local soil and water." Velthan's large eyes widened. 72 hours? Our fastest growing crops take 30 days at minimum. Earth crops are different, Paul explained. We have varieties that grow very fast for emergency situations. They do not produce as much food per plant, but they produce it quickly when people are starving. The transmission ended, and the room returned to its busy planning. David walked over to the tactical display that showed the positions of all known consortium worlds. Red markers indicated planets where the blight had struck. Yellow markers showed worlds that were still healthy but running out of stored food. Green markers represented the few places that still had adequate supplies. "There are too many red markers," said Colonel Stevens. "Even if our plan works perfectly, we cannot reach all the affected worlds in time." Supreme Strategist Corvin's scales flickered thoughtfully. "Perhaps we do not need to reach them all at once. If we can stabilize the most important worlds first, they can help us reach the smaller colonies." Dr. Rachel Kim joined them at the display. "I have been thinking about this problem. We cannot just bring Earth crops to every world. We need to teach the aliens how to modify our techniques for their own local conditions." "What do you mean?" asked David. Rachel pointed to several star systems on the map. Each alien species has different needs and different environments, but the principles of human agriculture can be adapted. Crop rotation, companion planting, soil management. These ideas work everywhere if you adjust them properly. She pulled up images from various alien worlds. "Look at this granite people colony. Their world is mostly rock with very thin soil, but we can teach them vertical farming techniques. They could grow food in towers built right into their cliff cities." She switched to another image. "The Wisp homeworld has a very thick atmosphere and constant storms. Traditional farming would not work there, but we can show them how to build protected growing environments that use the storm energy to power their food production." General Parker was beginning to understand. "You are not just talking about bringing Earth food to alien worlds. You are talking about bringing Earth knowledge and letting each species adapt it to their own needs." "Exactly," Rachel said. "That way they do not become dependent on us for food. They learn to feed themselves using improved methods." A new alarm sounded in the command center. Lieutenant Sarah Walsh hurried over with an urgent report. "General, we are receiving distress calls from the Kepler system," she said. "Scout ships report that something is attacking the agricultural research stations there." Supreme Strategist. Corvin's scales turned bright red, a sign of alarm in his species. "The enemy reveals itself. They do not want this crisis to end." Colonel Stevens was already moving toward his command station. "All escort squadrons prepare for immediate departure. We may be flying into a fight." David felt his stomach tighten. They had hoped to deliver aid to starving worlds in peace. Now, it looked like they would have to fight for the right to feed people. "Who could be doing this?" he asked Corvin. The alien commander's scales darkened to black. "There are species in the outer regions who feed on conflict and chaos. They grow stronger when civilizations fall. If the consortium collapses, they will move in to take what remains." Dr. Rachel Kim looked up from her work. "Then we need to move faster. Every day we delay, more people die and the enemy gets stronger." Paul Morrison's voice came through the communication system from the ship preparation bays. "The first convoy is loaded and ready. We have enough supplies to feed 2 million beings for 30 days, plus all the equipment needed to start permanent growing operations." "Launch as soon as possible," David ordered. "And Paul, be careful out there. We still do not know exactly what we are facing." "Understood," Paul replied. "But General, these people are starving. Whatever is out there, we have to try." As the first ships of Operation Seed Drop prepared to launch, David looked around the command center. Humans and aliens worked side by side, united by the simple goal of preventing starvation. 3 months ago, Most of these alien species had barely acknowledged humanity as equals. Now they were trusting humans to save their entire civilizations. "Corvin," he said to the Supreme Strategist, "do you really think this can work? Can we teach ancient civilizations to change their entire way of growing food?" The alien commander's scale shifted to a steady blue, which David had learned meant thoughtful confidence. "General Parker, your species has shown us something we had forgotten. You have reminded us that survival is more important than pride. If that is not worth fighting for, then nothing is." Outside, the first ships rose into the sky, carrying hope to distant worlds. The real test was just beginning. Admiral Susan Clark stood on the bridge of the UES Liberty, watching enemy ships emerge from hyperspace like deadly shadows. The vessels were unlike anything in the consortium fleet. They looked more grown than built, with organic curves and pulsing veins of sickly light running along their hulls. These were the ships of the Devourers, and they had finally revealed themselves. "All ships, battle stations," Susan commanded. "Protect the agricultural convoy at all costs." Behind her, Fleet 12 massive transport ships carried the hope of 3 star systems. Each vessel was loaded with earth crops, farming equipment, and human agricultural experts who had volunteered to risk their lives to feed strangers. The enemy ships opened fire first. Instead of energy beams or missiles, they launched clouds of dark spores that spread through space like living smoke. When the spores touched the hull of a consortium patrol ship, the metal began to corrode and rot. "Admiral, the enemy weapons are biological," reported Captain James Rodriguez from the tactical station. "They are using some kind of aggressive decay organism." "Can our shields stop it?" Susan asked. "Unknown. We have never faced anything like this before." The first real battle began as consortium fighters engaged the Devourer bioships. The space around Altera Prime lit up with weapon fire and explosions. Susan watched as brave pilots from a dozen different species fought side by side to protect the convoy carrying their salvation. Down on the planet's surface, engineer Paul Morrison worked frantically to set up the first emergency growing facility. The building was simple, just a large greenhouse with Earth-designed growing beds and irrigation systems. But to the starving Alterans watching him work, it might as well have been a miracle. "The soil analysis is complete," reported Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a soil specialist who had come with Paul's team. "The local dirt is actually very good for growing. The blight killed the plants but did not damage the earth itself." Paul wiped sweat from his forehead. "How long until we can have the first crops in the ground?" 6 hours to prepare the beds, then we can plant immediately," Jennifer replied. "The fast-growing potatoes should be ready to harvest in 4 days." Around them, Alteran workers helped carry equipment and supplies. Many of them were so weak from hunger they could barely lift the lighter boxes, but they refused to stop helping. One young Alteran named Kethvar worked beside Paul, learning how to operate the earth farming equipment. "I do not understand," Kethvar said as they planted rows of modified potato seeds. "Your people could have demanded payment for this help. You could have asked for trading rights or territorial concessions. Why do you help us for free?" Paul looked at the alien, who was barely more than a teenager. Kethvar's blue skin was pale with malnutrition, and his large eyes showed the strain of weeks without proper food. "Because you are hungry," Paul said simply. "Where I come from, you do not let neighbors starve if you can help them." "But we are not your neighbors. We are not even your species." Paul smiled as he covered another seed with soil. "Kid, if we are all living in the same galaxy, then we are all neighbors." Above them, the space battle continued. Admiral Susan Clark coordinated the defense while trying to keep the convoy safe. The Devourer ships were tough and their biological weapons were terrifying, but they had not expected such unified resistance from the normally fractured consortium species. "Admiral, this is Hive Captain Zix aboard the insectoid battlecruiser." "Sharp Claw," came a buzzing voice over the communication system. "My ship is damaged, but we can still fight. Request permission to ram the largest enemy vessel." "Negative, Captain Zix. We need you alive. Fall back to defensive position around the convoy." "But Admiral, my ship will not survive much longer. Anyway, let us make our deaths count for something." Susan felt a chill run down her spine. The insectoid species was known for their willingness to sacrifice themselves for the good of the group, but she could not bear the thought of these brave beings dying when they were so close to saving their people. Captain Zix, I have a better idea. Can your ship's biological scanners identify the source of the enemy spore weapons? There was a brief pause. Yes, Admiral. We are detecting several large organ-like structures on each enemy ship. They appear to be the launch points for the decay spores. Perfect. All ships, target those biological weapon systems. If we can stop their spore attacks, our shields should protect us from their other weapons. The tide of battle began to turn. Consortium ships focused their fire on the organic weapon pods, causing them to burst in clouds of green fluid. Without their biological weapons, the Devourer ships were forced to rely on conventional energy weapons, which the Consortium shields could handle much better. On Altera Prime, the first emergency crops were already beginning to sprout. Paul Morrison stood in the greenhouse with Ambassador Velthan, who had insisted on visiting despite his weakness. The Alteran leader stared in amazement at the tiny green shoots pushing up through the soil. 4 days ago, this soil was completely barren, Velthan whispered. How is this possible? Dr. Jennifer Walsh knelt beside one of the growing beds. Earth plants are very good at growing in difficult conditions. We have spent thousands of years breeding crops that can survive droughts, diseases, and poor soil. It is one of our greatest achievements. And you are sharing this achievement freely with us, Velthan said. Your species continues to surprise me. As they spoke, more Alterans arrived at the growing facility. Word had spread through the city that the humans were successfully growing food. People came to see for themselves, and many stayed to help with the work. Soon Alterans and humans were working side by side, preparing more growing beds and planting more seeds. In space, Admiral Susan Clark received reports from across the system. Admiral, the enemy is retreating, announced Captain Rodriguez. Their main fleet is pulling back to hyperspace. Do not let them escape, Susan ordered. I want to know where they came from and where they are going. But even as she spoke, the Devourer ships vanished into hyperspace, leaving behind only the wreckage of their destroyed vessels. The battle was won, but Susan knew this was just the beginning. The enemy had revealed themselves, but they would be back with more ships and new weapons. Admiral, we are receiving a transmission from Earth, reported the communications officer. General Parker wants to speak with you. David Parker's face appeared on the main screen, looking tired but determined. Susan, how did the first delivery go? The convoy is safe and the agricultural teams are already growing food on Altera Prime, she replied. But we were attacked by a species that calls themselves the Devourers. They have biological weapons we have never seen before. David's expression grew serious. We expected there might be resistance. Can you handle them? I think so, as long as they do not bring bigger fleets. But David, there is something else. The way they fight, the way their ships look, they are not trying to conquer territory. They want to destroy civilization itself. Then we stop them, David said simply. How many more convoys are ready to launch? 12 more ships are loading. Supplies for the hive worlds, and another 20 are being prepared for the Granite People colonies. Good. Keep them moving. The faster we can restore food production across the consortium, the stronger we will be when the Devourers return. Down on Altera Prime, Paul Morrison watched the sun set over the first successful Earth-style farm on an alien world. In just 1 day, they had planted enough crops to feed thousands of people. In a week, those crops would be ready to harvest. In a month, the techniques would spread to farms across the planet. Kethvar, the young Alteran who had worked beside him all day, stood nearby holding a small green sprout. Engineer Morrison, he said, this plant will grow into food that will keep my family alive. How do I thank you for such a gift? Paul smiled and put his hand on the young alien's shoulder. You learn to grow your own food and then you teach others to do the same. That is how you thank me. Above them, stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere among those stars, the Devourers were planning their next attack. But here, on Altera Prime, hope was growing in the soil, 1 seed at a time. Captain Kevin Reynolds piloted his supply ship through the asteroid field surrounding the hive world of Terminus 7. carefully avoiding the floating rocks while watching for enemy scouts. In his cargo hold were not just food supplies and seeds, but 12 human agricultural experts who had volunteered to live among the insectoid aliens and teach them earth farming methods. "Captain, we are receiving landing clearance from the hive," reported his co-pilot, Lieutenant Amy Foster. "They are directing us to landing platform Delta 9. Kevin nodded as he guided the ship toward the strange geometric structures that served as cities for the hive species. The buildings looked like massive honeycombs carved from black stone, with thousands of tunnels and chambers where millions of insectoid workers lived and labored. As the ship touched down, Kevin could see hundreds of hive workers gathering around the landing platform. Many of them looked thin and weak, their chitinous shells dull instead of the bright black they should have been. But they moved with excitement, clicking their mandibles rapidly in the communication pattern that served as their language. "I hope we brought enough food," muttered Dr. Mary Johnson, the lead agricultural specialist on the mission. She was a tough woman who had spent 30 years farming in difficult conditions on Earth, but even she looked nervous about working with giant insects. The cargo doors opened and the human team began unloading supplies. To Kevin's surprise, the hive workers immediately began helping, working with mechanical precision to move boxes and equipment. Within an hour, everything was organized and ready for transport to the growing areas. Hive Queen Clix arrived with an escort of larger warrior drones. She looked better than she had on Earth, but Kevin could still see the effects of starvation in her movements. Her usually quick, aggressive gestures were slower and more careful. Human Captain Reynolds, she buzzed through her translation device. "My workers are eager to learn your farming methods, but I must warn you, we think very differently from your species. What works for individual humans may not work for collective minds like ours." Dr. Johnson stepped forward. "Your Majesty, I think you will be surprised. Many of our best farming techniques are based on cooperation and working together. In fact, your hive mind might make you better at our methods than we are." They traveled through the tunnels to reach the growing chambers deep inside the hive structure. Kevin was amazed by what he saw. The insectoids had already begun converting their living spaces into growing areas, with perfect geometric patterns of soil beds and irrigation channels. "This is incredible organization," said Tom Wilson, another member of the agricultural team. "It would take us weeks to prepare growing areas this well organized." "My workers do not need individual instruction," Hive Queen Clix explained. "When one learns, all learn. When I understand your techniques, every worker in the hive will understand them instantly." Dr. Johnson began demonstrating companion planting techniques, showing how different crops could be grown together to help each other. She planted beans next to corn stalks, explaining how the beans would climb the corn and add nitrogen to the soil. "But this seems chaotic," clicked one of the hive workers. "Why not plant each crop in separate organized sections?" "Because chaos can be stronger than order," Mary replied. "When different plants grow together, they protect each other from diseases and pests. If one type gets sick, the others stay healthy." Hive Queen Clix watched carefully as Mary demonstrated crop rotation, showing how different plants should be grown in the same soil at different times to keep the earth healthy. Her large compound eyes tracked every movement, and Kevin could almost see her processing the information. "I understand," she buzzed suddenly. "Your farming is like a hive that includes plants instead of just insects. Every species has a role. Every organism contributes to the whole." "Exactly," Mary said, smiling. "You get it faster than most humans do." Meanwhile, on dozens of other worlds, similar scenes were playing out. Human agricultural experts worked with granite people to build vertical farms inside cliff faces. They helped wisp communities create floating growing platforms that could survive in their storm-filled atmosphere. On every world, the techniques were different, but the principles were the same. On Altera Prime, engineer Paul Morrison received a communication from his brother Jake, who was coordinating the overall relief effort from Earth. "Paul, how are things going down there?" Jake asked from his office at the consortium headquarters. "Better than we hoped," Paul replied, standing in a field where Alterans and humans worked together, harvesting the first successful crop. The locals are natural farmers once they understand the principles. In fact, they are starting to improve on our techniques. Paul pointed his communicator toward a group of Alteran workers who were using their naturally long arms to tend plants in ways humans could never manage. Their height advantage let them care for crops growing on multiple levels simultaneously. They can do things we never thought of, Paul continued, and they are teaching us new methods that we can use on other worlds. But even as the agricultural mission succeeded, darker news arrived. Captain Reynolds received an urgent message while working in the hive tunnels. All civilian ships, this is Admiral Clark aboard the Liberty. We have detected a massive enemy fleet approaching the Sol system. They are heading for Earth. Kevin felt his blood turn cold. Earth was not just humanity's homeworld. It was the source of all the seeds, knowledge, and equipment that was saving the galaxy. If the Devourers destroyed Earth, the agricultural revolution would die with it. Admiral, this is Captain Reynolds on Terminus 7, he radioed back. How long until they arrive? 18 hours. All available ships are being recalled to defend Earth, but we do not have enough firepower to stop a fleet this size. Hive Queen Clicks, who had been listening through her translation device, made a sound like grinding metal. It was the insectoid equivalent of determination. Captain Reynolds, she buzzed. My species owes humanity a great debt. We will not let it go unpaid. Kevin was confused. Your Majesty, your ships are needed here to protect your own people. You do not understand, Clicks replied. Thanks to your farming methods, my people will survive even if every ship is destroyed. But without Earth, there will be no more seeds, no more knowledge, no more hope for any of us. Similar conversations were happening across the galaxy. On Altera Prime, Ambassador Velthan made the same decision. On the granite people worlds, the rock-like aliens prepared their mighty battleships. Even the peaceful wisps began arming their vessels for war. This is unprecedented, Jake Morrison said as reports flooded in from across the consortium. 50 different species are sending ships to defend Earth. Some of them have been enemies for centuries, but they are putting aside their differences to help us. Admiral Susan Clark reviewed the fleet compositions as ships began arriving in Einbudine Earth solar system. Insectoid hive ships with their swarming fighter craft. Massive granite people dreadnoughts that looked like flying mountains. Elegant Alteran cruisers with their crystalline hulls. Dozens of other vessel types from species she could barely pronounce. Admiral, reported her tactical officer, we have over 300 allied ships taking positions around Earth. This is the largest combined fleet in consortium history. Susan nodded, but her expression remained grim. It may not be enough. The Devourer fleet is massive, and they have weapons we still do not fully understand. On the surface of Earth, Alex Rodriguez stood in a Kansas wheat field that had been in his family for generations. He had been drafted into the Defense Forces because of his background in both farming and military service. His job was to coordinate the protection of critical seed banks and agricultural research facilities. If they break through our defenses, he said to his team, these facilities are their primary targets. They know that destroying our agricultural knowledge will stop the relief effort completely. Around him, farmers and scientists worked to hide irreplaceable seeds and research data in underground bunkers scattered across the planet. These were not soldiers, but they understood that they were fighting for the future of all life in the galaxy. As the Devourer fleet approached Earth's outer defenses, Susan Clark opened a communication channel to all ships in the combined fleet. This is Admiral Clark to all vessels. Today we fight not for territory or resources, but for the right to feed our families. The enemy wants to see our civilization starve and fall. We will show them that the galaxy stands united. The response came in dozens of languages and communication methods, but the message was the same from every species. We stand with Earth. We stand with humanity. We fight together. The greatest battle in galactic history was about to begin, and at its center was a small blue planet, whose greatest weapon was the knowledge of how to make things grow. The space around Earth erupted into the largest battle the galaxy had ever seen. Admiral Susan Clark watched from the bridge of the Liberty as thousands of ships from dozens of species fought against the dark biovessels of the Devourers. Energy, Beams and missile trails crisscrossed the void while fighters swarmed like angry insects around the larger capital ships. "Admiral, the enemy is breaking through the outer defense line," reported Captain Rodriguez. "3 Devourer heavy cruisers are heading directly for the agricultural research stations. All reserve squadrons intercept those ships," Susan ordered. "Do not let them reach the surface." On the farming world below, Alex Rodriguez crouched in a wheat field with his defense team, watching enemy fighters streak through the atmosphere toward the seed storage facilities. These Devourer craft were different from their spaceships, looking more like flying parasites with writhing tentacles that dripped corrosive acid. "Here they come," Alex shouted to his team. "Remember, protect the seed banks at all costs. If those are destroyed, the relief effort dies with them." The human defenders opened fire with shoulder-mounted anti-aircraft weapons, but the enemy craft were fast and hard to hit. One Devourer fighter crashed into a grain silo, immediately beginning to digest the structure with its acidic secretions. But the aliens had not expected the planet to be so well defended. As the enemy fighters approached the main research facility, they flew directly into a trap. Hive fighter squadrons that had been hiding in Earth's clouds suddenly appeared, their ships moving with the perfect coordination that only insectoid minds could achieve. "This is Hive Captain Zix to ground forces," came a buzzing voice over the radio. "We have the enemy fighters surrounded, but there are too many of them." Alex watched as the insectoid fighters engaged the Devourers directly above the most important seed bank on the planet. If that facility was destroyed, it would take decades to replace the genetic material stored there. "Zix, this is Rodriguez. Can you drive them away from the facility?" "Negative, but we can ensure they do not complete their mission. Preparing for collision course." "Wait," Alex shouted into his radio. "There has to be another way." But it was too late. He watched in horror and amazement as dozens of Hive fighters flew directly into the larger Devourer craft, destroying both themselves and the enemy in massive explosions. The insectoid pilots had sacrificed themselves to protect Earth's agricultural knowledge. In space, the main battle continued to rage. The combined consortium fleet was holding its own, but barely. The Devourers had brought more ships than anyone had expected, and their biological weapons were taking a terrible toll on the defenders. "Admiral Clark," came a transmission from Alteran Battle Commander Thel Kiss. "Our shields are failing. We cannot maintain this defensive formation much longer." Susan looked at the tactical display. They were losing too many ships too quickly. Unless something changed soon, the Devourers would break through to Earth's surface and destroy everything humanity had worked to build. Then something unexpected happened. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who had been working with soil restoration teams on the surface, made a discovery that changed everything. "Admiral Clark, this is Dr. Walsh at Agricultural Research Station 7, came a voice from the planet below. "I have been studying the wreckage of destroyed Devourer fighters, and I think I have found something important." "Go ahead, Doctor." "The Devourer biological systems are designed to break down specific molecular structures, but they cannot handle Earth's crop rotation compounds. When they try to digest plants that have been grown using our rotation methods, their own digestive systems start to fail." Susan felt a spark of hope. "Are you saying our farming techniques can be used as weapons?" "In a way, yes. If we could somehow expose the Devourer ships to concentrated crop rotation compounds, it might disrupt their biological systems." In the research facilities below, teams of scientists worked frantically to extract and concentrate the chemical compounds that made Earth's crop rotation so effective. Meanwhile, the battle in space grew more desperate by the minute. Captain Kevin Reynolds, who had returned from the Hive worlds just in time for the battle, piloted a supply ship loaded with the experimental compounds. "Admiral, we have the crop rotation concentrate ready for deployment, but how do we get it to the enemy ships?" "We use their own weapons against them," Susan replied. "Their spore attacks create clouds of biological material in space. If we can seed those clouds with our concentrate, it should spread to their ships through their own weapon systems." The plan was dangerous and had never been tested, but it was their only hope. Human ships began firing special missiles into the Devourer spore clouds. At first, Nothing seemed to happen. Then, slowly, the enemy bioships began to show signs of distress. The organic hulls of the Devourer vessels started to change color, turning from their healthy dark green to a sickly yellow. Their weapons stopped firing as their biological systems struggled to process the foreign compounds. "It is working," shouted Captain Rodriguez from his tactical station. "The enemy ships are losing power, but the victory came at a cost. Many of the defending ships had been destroyed or damaged in the long battle. The space around Earth was filled with debris from vessels of a dozen different species." On the planet below, Alex Rodriguez walked through his family's wheat field, surveying the damage from the ground battle. Several buildings had been destroyed, and the field itself was scarred with craters from crashed enemy fighters. But the seed banks were safe, and that was what mattered. As he walked, he noticed something strange. In the craters where the Devourer fighters had crashed, new plants were beginning to grow. These were not Earth crops, but something different. They looked like a hybrid between Earth plants and alien species. "Dr. Walsh," he called on his radio. "You need to come see this." Jennifer arrived within the hour and examined the strange new plants with amazement. "Alex, this is incredible. The Devourer biological material is combining with our crop rotation compounds to create entirely new species of food plants." She knelt down and carefully collected samples. These plants seemed to be able to grow in almost any conditions. They could revolutionize agriculture across the galaxy. In the days that followed, the extent of the victory became clear. The Devourer fleet had been completely defeated, with most of their ships destroyed or disabled. But more importantly, the knowledge gained from the battle led to even better agricultural techniques. President Robert Hayes stood before a gathering of representatives from every species in the consortium. The meeting was held in the same agricultural research facility that had been attacked during the battle. 5 years ago, he said, our galaxy faced its greatest crisis. Billions were starving and our civilizations were on the verge of collapse. Today we stand stronger and more united than ever before. He gestured toward the windows, where diverse crops grew in fields tended by beings from a dozen different worlds. The Devourers thought they could destroy us by making us hungry. Instead, they taught us to work together. They forced us to share our knowledge and support each other. Ambassador Velthan, now fully recovered and healthy, stood up to speak. Humanity showed us that strength does not come from advanced technology or military power. It comes from the willingness to help others, even when they cannot help you in return. Hive Queen Clix, whose species had rebuilt their numbers using Earth agricultural techniques, clicked her agreement. The humans gave us more than food. They gave us hope. They showed us that different species can work together instead of competing for resources. In the fields outside, Tom Bradley worked alongside his alien students, teaching them the finer points of companion planting. The old farmer had become something of a celebrity across the galaxy, but he preferred to spend his time in the soil, helping things grow. "Teacher Tom," said Kethvar, the young Alteran who had become one of his best students, "why do the earth plants grow so much better when they are mixed together instead of separated?" Tom smiled and patted the alien's shoulder with his dirt-covered hand. "Same reason people do better when they work together instead of being alone. Everything grows better when it has friends to help it." Nearby, Dr. Sarah Phillips put the finishing touches on a document that would change galactic civilization forever. The Galactic Agricultural Accords established permanent food security protocols based on human farming wisdom. Every world would maintain diverse crop systems. Every species would share agricultural knowledge freely. And most importantly, no world would ever again depend on single crop farming that could be wiped out by disease or attack. The most surprising development came from an unexpected source. Some of the captured Devourer prisoners, faced with starvation in their holding cells, were offered a choice by President Hayes. They could remain in prison and slowly starve, or they could learn to grow their own food using human techniques. Most Devourers chose death rather than what they saw as humiliation, but a few, desperate and broken, accepted the offer. Dr. Michael Chen worked with these former enemies, teaching them that there was another way to live besides consuming the achievements. of others. Growing food is harder than destroying it, he told them in the converted prison that had become a farming school. But it is also more satisfying. When you create life instead of ending it, you become stronger instead of weaker. The transformation was slow and difficult. The devourers had spent so many generations as parasites that they had forgotten how to create anything for themselves. But gradually, with human guidance, some of them learned to find satisfaction in nurturing plants instead of destroying civilizations. 5 years after the crisis began, Commander Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of the New Harmony Agricultural Complex on Altera Prime. The massive facility combined the best features of human and alien farming techniques, producing enough food to feed 3 planets while using only a fraction of the land that traditional methods would have required. Through the transparent walls, he could see human children playing with young Alterans and newly hatched hive larvae. The children chased each other through gardens where earth vegetables grew beside alien fruit trees. Their laughter echoed through the growing chambers, a sound that would have been impossible just a few years earlier. "Hard to believe how much has changed," said a voice behind him. Jake turned to see Dr. Amanda Foster, who had become the Director of Galactic Agricultural Development. Her hair was now streaked with gray from years of hard work, but her eyes sparkled with satisfaction. "When this all started," Jake replied, "I thought we were just trying to prevent a famine. I never imagined we would end up changing how the entire galaxy thinks about cooperation." Amanda nodded toward the windows, where representatives from dozens of species worked together in the growing fields. "The funny thing is, we did not really teach them anything new. We just reminded them of something they had forgotten." "What do you mean?" "Every successful species had to learn cooperation to survive. The Alterans worked together in their cities. The hive species is built on cooperation. Even the granite. People form communities in their mountain homes, but somewhere along the way they forgot that cooperation could extend beyond their own species." In the fields below, Tom Bradley was finishing his daily teaching session with a mixed class of young beings from 8 different worlds. The old farmer had gray hair now and moved more slowly than he used to, but his love for growing things had only gotten stronger with age. "Remember," he was saying to his students, "plants are just like people. They do better when they have friends to help them. The corn helps the beans reach the sun. The beans help the corn get nutrients from the soil. The squash keeps them both safe from weeds and pests." A young granite child, whose rock-like skin was still soft and brown instead of the hard gray of adults, raised a stubby arm. "Teacher, Tom, do humans help each other the same way plants do?" Tom smiled and knelt down to be at the child's level. "We try to, little one. When the galaxy was hungry, humans shared their food knowledge. When Earth was attacked, aliens came to help defend it. When we work together like the plants do, everyone grows stronger." As the teaching session ended, massive cargo ships rose from the complex's landing pads, carrying surplus food and seeds to distant worlds. The galaxy's agricultural network had become so efficient that food shortages were now almost impossible. More importantly, the bonds formed during the crisis had created the strongest alliance in known history. That evening, Jake Morrison received a message from Earth. His old friend General David Parker had been promoted to head of Galactic Defense Coordination, and he was reporting on the final stages of the Devourer Rehabilitation Program. "Jake, you will not believe this," David said from his office in the Pentagon. 3 more Devourer groups have requested permission to join the agricultural communities. They want to learn farming instead of raiding." "How are they adapting?" Jake asked. "Slowly, but they are learning. Dr. Chen says some of them are actually becoming quite good at growing the hybrid plants that developed from the battle debris. Apparently, their biological nature gives them insights into plant growth that even we do not have." Jake shook his head in amazement. "So the species that tried to destroy galactic civilization is now helping to feed it." "Strange how things work out," David replied. "The crisis that nearly ended everything has created the most peaceful period in galactic history." As the communication ended, Jake walked out onto the observation deck one more time. The stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and he could see the lights of ships moving between them. carrying food and hope to worlds throughout the galaxy. Somewhere out there, former enemies worked together in growing fields, learning that cooperation was stronger than conflict. Children of different species played together while their parents shared the ancient human wisdom of making things grow. The galaxy had learned that sometimes the greatest victories came not from defeating enemies, but from turning them into friends. And it all started with the simple idea that no one should go hungry if you have the power to feed them.